Before I get into some examples, I wanted to just kind of go through and summarize all the vector operations that we've talked about so far. I've broken them down into two-dimensional and three-dimensional formulas. So the first is the resultant. If we have a vector in its rectangular coordinates, either x and y coordinates or a sub x, a sub y, a sub z, we want to find the resultant of that vector, we use Pythagorean theorem. We square each of the quantities and take the square root of that. From that, we've also found that if we want to find the rectangular components from one force vector, we need the angles. The ij and k components are just the force times the cosine of each angle. If you're in 2D, you have theta x, theta y. If you're in 3D, you have theta x, theta y, and what should be written theta z. So that's how you would find the resultant and the components of a vector if you have I there. We talked about unit vectors. Unit vectors give purely direction. So if we want to remove the magnitude from each vector, we can divide each quantity by the resultant. So if we have the x component, we divide it by the resultant, we take out the magnitude from the vector, and that works in both 2D and in 3D. Since we've removed the magnitude, all it has is directions. So we can define the unit vector as just the cosine of the angle. This gives us direction without magnitude. And if we have a unit vector, the resultant is obviously equal to 1. That's why we call it a unit vector. That 1 is equal to the cosine squared of the angle between the vector and the x and y and x, y, and z axes. And then finally, if we want to find the angle between two vectors, we can go and use the dot product. And the dot product you get by multiplying each rectangular component from the vector. So ax times bx, ay times by, az times bz, and adding them all up, and that will give you a scalar quantity. If you're doing this between a line, a would be your original vector, b would become the unit vector. A and b here are the resultants of the vector. So your resultant for b would become 1 if it was a unit vector. And this theta is the angle between the two vectors.